What's up? This is Charles with Rocky Mountain ATV MC. Today I'm going to show you how to replace your water pump seal on your Polaris 900 or 1000 side by side. If you have coolant leaking from the weep hole on your water pump, then it means the mechanical seal is bad and it needs to be replaced. If you don't replace it, it's going to cause serious engine damage. So make sure you get that swapped out. That's what happened to our 2014 Polaris RZR XP 1000. So we're going to get the seal swapped out, but I do want to point out this procedure will be similar for 900 and 1000 cc side-by-sides for your RZRs, Rangers, Generals, and the turbo models, or pretty much any machine that has an external water pump. Just be sure to reference your model-specific service manual, and it's actually a pretty simple procedure, so let's go ahead and jump into it. Now, as far as tools, parts, and consumables go, we have common hand tools, a torque wrench, we also have some picks, hammer punch, we have some sockets to help drive the new seals into place, drain pan, funnel, rag, safety glasses, rubber gloves, and then we've got some blue Loctite, waterproof grease, contact cleaner, some coolant. We have a lot of different options for coolant on the website. And then we have some parts that you find under the OEM diagram for your machine. So you have different options on this. You can buy the complete pump. This is the easiest and fastest way to do it. Or you can buy half a pump with the mechanical seal already installed into it. Or the most cost-effective way is the way we're going to show you how to do it. It just takes a little more work, and we're going to replace all the individual seals and O-rings. So we'll go ahead and jump into this. If you need any of the parts, they're available on our website, so be sure to check that out. And as with any job, make sure you refer to your model-specific service manual for more information, proper procedures, and specs. All right, so this is our water pump assembly. So right here on the water pump, we have a mechanical seal in here, and this other side we have an oil seal sitting in there. Now, in between that, we have a weep hole. So the weep hole, you can see two dots right here. This bottom dot is actually just a Sharpie mark. The top dot is the weep hole, and that just indicates if one of these seals go bad. So if the oil seal goes bad, you're going to see oil dripping out of this, and this mechanical seal or water pump seal, if that goes bad, coolant's going to drip out of that. So that's located on the bottom. So if I flip this around, this is how this sits on the machine. So if you see coolant from behind that bolt dripping down that's not from that center gasket, then you know it's coming from that weep hole. All right, next thing, we're actually going to start this up so you can see what's happening to ours. So behind this bottom bolt, you're going to see some coolant coming down, and it's actually going to trickle down on our oil pan, and it's going to drip all the way down to our drain bolt and start dripping out there. So I'll go ahead and start this up. If your leak is coming from this weep hole, we'll show you how to get it fixed. The first thing we're going to do is disconnect our negative battery cable. We'll then remove the hood and radiator cap. This will allow us to drain the coolant. The first coolant hose we'll remove here is at the bottom of our radiator. Make sure you have your drain pan underneath it. Once the coolant is done draining out, you can reconnect the cooling hose. Next, we're going to move back to our water pump. We'll place our drain pan underneath because more coolant will come out as we remove the 5 hoses. We're going to start with this big one. Now, a couple of things I want to point out. There will be quite a bit of coolant that comes out of this big hose, so it would be handy to have an extra drain pan underneath. Now, we've already gone ahead and cleaned the area around the water pump. If you haven't done that yet, make sure you do so now, and then we can start disconnecting the hoses. And the last hose we'll remove is on the back side of this elbow. Now that we have all of the hoses out of the way, we're going to remove the 3 brass colored bolts. Once you have those bolts out, we can remove the pump. Now sometimes these pumps get stuck in there pretty good because the O-rings get baked on. Once the pump is out, we'll take it to the bench. All right, now that we have the pump on the bench, what we're gonna do is remove these O-rings from this backside. We'll just use our pick, and you definitely wanna replace these anytime this pump is off. That way you're not gonna have leaks. And we have the 3 remaining bolts that hold this cover on the pump. So next we'll remove this pump cover. And at this point we need to remove this O-ring. You want to replace this anytime it's apart as well. So for this one came out easy. A lot of times they don't come out like that. They're glued in here, number 1, and number 2, sometimes they just get cooked on there really good and they're really stubborn to get out. So it might take some time to clean all of this up really well. Once you have that out of there, this piece right here, I highly recommend replacing this as a unit at this point. But as we mentioned, we are going to show you how to replace the seals if that's what you choose to do. This does require some special tools, but we're going to show you how to do it for the average guy at his home shop. So we're not going to have a press, and we're also not going to be using, there's a special tool to get this seal installed. We'll show you another method. And if you're not comfortable with any of this, again, this thing, you might only be spending another $25 and just get this whole part and be done with it. But we'll go ahead, we'll bring this over to the vise, and we're gonna set this in. We have soft jaws already on our vise. There's this tab on the bottom. We're just gonna clamp that in there. Now this bolt, this is reverse thread. So just think lefty tighty, righty loosey in this situation, exactly opposite of what you would normally do. And this is connected to that shaft. So now we'll loosen that up. We'll remove the bolt. There's a washer on here as well. And then you have the impeller. Get that out of the way. So this next part, I'm gonna take this out of the vise. I'm gonna loosen up the vise and I'm gonna rotate it so these jaws are over the table. We're gonna press this shaft out of both of these seals. So the shaft is actually pressed into the mechanical seal, and normally you'd be using an arbor press to remove that. So what we're gonna do is set this backside into the soft jaws. Just make sure that this lip is supported on both sides. And I'm actually just gonna lightly clamp that into place. And then since we're pressing this shaft out, what I'm gonna do is set a bunch of rags underneath, and the rags are just gonna catch it when it falls out. Now to punch this out, what we're gonna do is just get a drift. We'll put it on the end of this shaft and press down. And I'm just gonna tap it out. So once that's out, we can remove this body from the vise, and I'm gonna set this flat on this wooden surface right here. So you need a punch or a drift that has a shaft that's 4 millimeters in diameter or less. And there's this slot in the side of the pump, so it's gonna fit right down in there. And what we're gonna do is use a heat gun. We'll heat this body up, and that's gonna let us press out. There's an oil seal in there as well as the mechanical seal. So we'll go ahead and do that. So we got the mechanical seal out. Oil seal needs a little more. It just popped out right there. So you need to pay attention to the direction of this seal. So this open side, with this facing down, the open side is facing up. So just keep that in mind when you go to reassemble everything. So at this point, we need to clean this up, make sure there's no damage to the body. That bore where the shaft actually rides, you need to make sure that's completely smooth and clean, that you didn't accidentally nick it with your punch. And then you're gonna inspect this shaft as well. So on the shaft, you wanna make sure there's no deep grooves where that oil seal rides. If there are, you're just gonna have to replace this whole thing as an assembly. So we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna take some contact cleaner to everything, make sure it's all cleaned up really well, and then we'll start with reassembly. And don't be afraid to take your time when you're cleaning all these parts. All right, when we were cleaning our parts, we did notice some damage on this shaft. So you can see that dark spot right there. There's 2 grooves in it, and those were right where this oil seal rides. So we're not even gonna mess with that. We're gonna buy this shaft, and the only way to get it is in this complete assembly. So that's what we're gonna have to do. So we're not gonna open either of these seals. We're gonna get the new part, but as promised, we're gonna go ahead and show you how to get this back together. What you're gonna do next is take your seal, and you'll find a socket that is just slightly smaller outside diameter, so you can get it all the way down in its bore. Once you've done that, set the seal in place. And again, this closed side, when you're setting it in, it's going to be facing up. And when you install this, you want to put a little bit of grease on the outside edge. Then you're also going to want grease down on the oil seal lips as well. And then also wipe off any excess grease. So on that flat side, I'm going to wipe it off. And we'll set this down into place. And you might be able to just push it into place, or if you need to, you can tap it with the hammer. You can hear where that changed pitch. That's seated all the way in there. That's exactly what you want with that seal. Now, if you do choose to hit it, just make sure you're lightly tapping it so you don't damage that seal. Now, since we did have grease on that, I want to make sure that this bore is completely clean. So what I'm going to do is put a little contact cleaner on my rag, and I'm going to wipe out where our mechanical seal is going to go. That way we make sure we get a good seal on it. So for this one, the new seal, it's going to have some sealant on that outer lip. This obviously is going to be facing down. And then we have right here, this is 25 millimeter socket, fits perfectly on that flange for ours, and it doesn't hit the center piece at all. This is how we're going to do it so we don't damage the seal. This has to be driven on first, and then we're going to hold this other piece into place. This piece is very delicate, so you need to make sure you're not hammering on it. You don't want to damage that. Again, you can hear that change pitch once it's seated fully into the pump housing. What you can do at home to help this go easier, you can actually put this in the freezer, and then I would recommend putting a little bit of grease on it, at least up to the point where that seal goes. And then what we're going to do is flip this over. We'll set this shaft into place, and we'll work it past that oil seal. You don't want to tear the lips. And then there's going to be a point where you feel some resistance, and I'm just holding the other side of the mechanical seal. Once you feel that resistance is where this shaft actually needs to be pressed into place. Now when you press it in this way, what you're going to have to do is, we're using a 16 millimeter socket, and this fits perfectly on the other side of that mechanical seal. And at this point you need to make sure the pressure is only on this inner ring right here on it, and only on this shaft. If it's anywhere else, you're probably going to damage the seal. So we're just going to set that on the table, and we're going to tap this shaft into place. So once that's in place, you need to check these washers. You don't want to tap this on too far. You want to make sure the two washers on the back, you can move them side to side still. You need to make sure you do it right the first time. This needs to be able to rotate freely, and really you just have one shot at that. So just be really cautious, take your time. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and install the impeller. So what we're going to do, set that into place. We'll go ahead and set this in our vise again. We also have the soft jaws on it still. All right, now we'll install this bolt again, reverse thread, and we're also going to apply some Loctite to it. We're just using some blue Loctite. And this is going to be torqued to 7 foot-pounds. We have an inch-pound torque wrench, so that's going to be 84 inch-pounds. And again, for this one, it's going to be lefty-tighty. Seven foot-pounds right there. We can go ahead and remove this from the vise. It's a good idea, once you have everything together, make sure that everything rotates freely. That way you know you haven't made any mistakes. Next, we'll take the new O-rings and put a little bit of grease on them and put them back onto the housing. All right, and then after that, you're good to go with this. But again, we're just going to replace the complete assembly, so I'm going to set that aside. So right here we have our new housing. And at this point, we need to put our new gasket into place. Now on this gasket, a lot of times you can use some glue that's specifically made for gluing gaskets into place. But what I'm going to do is just coat this with a light coating of grease. You don't want to get any grease in this housing, but really light coating. It's just going to help it stick into place while I assemble everything. Once that's in the right spot, if you got any grease inside this housing, you can go ahead and wipe it out. With the O-ring in the cover, I'm going to go ahead and set the pump assembly on top of it. We'll flip it over, and then we're going to install the bolts, and we're going to apply some blue Loctite to these bolts. And we'll torque these down to 7 foot-pounds. All right, once all of that is torqued down, since we're using this new housing, what we're going to do is apply some grease to these O-rings since they come dry. That's going to help us slip this into place when we go to install it on the RZR. So we'll go ahead and pull the RZR back in and get this installed. Now before we install the water pump, we need to make sure that this tab on our impeller shaft lines up with the groove on the oil pump drive shaft. That's what drives this. So for that, we're going to go ahead and look down in this hole where this mounts, see where the groove is on that, and then we'll place this water pump where it needs to go. If it's not in the correct position, you cannot install the water pump all the way on. So you can see our water pump, it mounted flushly to the engine case haft, so we know we're seated all the way. We know those tabs are aligned correctly. If that's not the case, you'll need to readjust until it does align correctly. So for us, we're going to take our mounting bolts and apply some Loctite to them. We're going to torque these to 7 foot-pounds. Now keep in mind this bottom left-hand corner, that's going to take the smaller or shorter bolt. Make sure you reconnect each cooling hose. And I'm going to rotate this clamp up so it doesn't cut a hole in this other hose. The next step is to fill our machine up with coolant. The total capacity for this is 5 liters, but just make sure you're topped up in the radiator. And then you're going to reinstall the radiator cap, start the machine up, let the fan cycle twice, and then let the machine cool down completely. Once you've done that, you need to crack the bleeder screw loose. So to get to that bleed screw above the exhaust manifold, I'm just going to reach in here through this access panel. Our engine is completely cold, and I've got an 8mm socket on the end of my wrench. We're going to crack that bleeder open, and once you feel coolant coming out, you can go ahead and close it. Make sure all the coolant level is topped off, and then you can reinstall the radiator cap. Next, we'll install the hood. We'll reconnect our battery and install our seats. And that's all there is to replacing the mechanical seal on your water pump for the 900 and 1000 side-by-sides from Polaris. If you need any of the parts we used today, they're available on our website, so be sure to check that out. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel because we have a lot of other helpful content on there. Thanks for watching.